All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, fundamental shift from traditional, rigid rules to a highly dynamic, AI-driven structure known as the Lattice Global Mesh Network. We're going to take a real architectural tour of how artificial intelligence and cognitive science are, quite literally, rewriting the blueprint of human governance. You see, it's no longer about paperwork and endless red tape. We're talking about engineering actual coordination in an age of just infinite noise.
So, here's our roadmap for the breakdown. 1. The end of bureaucracy. 2. Designing cognitive institutions. 3. The Lattice Mesh Network. 4. Orchestrating the AI hive. And 5. Prototypes for tomorrow. Let's get right to it.
Starting off with Section 1, the end of bureaucracy.
The absolutely crucial point to wrap our heads around right out of the gate is that future governance has to shift away from procedural authority. Instead, it has to compete for the single scarcest resource on the planet today, which is human attention. In the old world, institutions leaned heavily on legitimacy, hierarchy, and procedural expertise. And, because they essentially had a monopoly on the printing press or the broadcast towers, their authority was pretty much a given. But today, we live in an algorithmically mediated reality. Just think about it for a second. A single viral post from a totally anonymous account can override decades of institutional authority in, a matter of hours. If an organization can't capture and hold people's attention and actively earn their cognitive trust, all that formal authority in the world means absolutely zero. They just fade right into the background noise.
And because of that, those old, slow-moving management pyramids are rapidly being replaced by real-time nervous systems that can sense and adapt instantly. Think about how a traditional hierarchy actually works. Information has to painstakingly crawl up a chain of command, sit around waiting for a committee decision, and then slowly trickle all the way back down. It's incredibly slow. Now contrast that with a biological nervous system. When you accidentally touch a hot stove, you don't send a memo up to your brain and wait for approval to move your hand, right? No, you react instantly. In our high-velocity, highly fragmented information environment, institutions built like those old pyramids lose their coherence entirely. The future absolutely belongs to distributed feedback loops where rapid iteration and immediate adaptation are literally the most vital survival skills.
Moving on to Section 2, designing cognitive institutions.
Once we finally move past that old bureaucratic model, we start building using these 7 structural layers. And you can think of these kind of like weather systems for the mind. They're explicitly designed to manage our cognitive load, anchor shared facts, and really prevent narrative collapse. Let's make this concrete. Take cognitive load regulation and micro-personalization. Instead of blasting out a dense 500-page legal document to everyone, a cognitive institution personalizes the interface. It delivers exactly what you need to know, exactly when you need to know it, which drastically reduces everyday burnout. Or consider narrative ecosystems. This means walking away from forcing one singular, rigid story onto everyone. It's about accepting that a massive population is going to have plural and sometimes totally incompatible realities. When you stack all these layers together, you get a blueprint for an organization that actually adapts to shifting human cognition, instead of just forcing overwhelmed people to bend to rigid administrative rules.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Lattice Mesh Network.
So to actually operationalize all those layers we just talked about, we need a really powerful automated engine. Enter the Lattice Global Mesh Network. Now, the academic definition calls it a constraint-navigated phase space, but let's translate that dense jargon. Imagine the lattice as this massive digital sandbox, where thousands of different AI models are working and playing together. But here's the kicker. This sandbox has invisible walls and strict rules of physics hard-coded into it. These rules keep the AIs from hallucinating, wildly contradicting each other, or just completely crashing the entire system. Basically, it acts as the core structural governance, the runtime kernel for multi-agent AI. The lattice doesn't try to force a single dogmatic truth. Instead, its job is to maintain systemic coherence in a wildly fragmented reality.
To keep that digital sandbox perfectly stable, the lattice enforces 5 non-negotiable rules which it calls invariants. Coherence is the primary goal, obviously. Then reversibility is mandatory, meaning no action taken by an AI agent can be irreversible by default. We also absolutely have to respect finite attention, making sure the system doesn't overwhelm the human users. Then there's entropy immunity, which essentially just means preventing the system from spiraling into useless chaotic noise. But okay, my absolute favorite rule here is treating silence as a first-class state. Seriously, think about how refreshing it would be if modern algorithms actually chose silence over artificial outrage. Unanswered questions are perfectly fine in this system. It explicitly tells the network to just avoid jumping to a premature conclusion when it simply doesn't know the answer.
And get this, the Lattice even features an active immune system protocol affectionately named Stumpy. I love that name. Stumpy actually detects urgency addiction and actively injects deliberate friction to stop narrative inflation dead in its tracks. If the network detects highly potent but low coherence ideas, what we'd normally call viral junk information or clickbait panic, Stumpy steps right in. It downgrades the processing priority, forces a systemic pause, and acts as the ultimate defense against brittle, fake narratives. Just imagine if your social media feed had a Stumpy to actively hit pause on a panicked fake news story before it made its way to your family text thread. That is exactly the kind of cognitive defense mechanism we're talking about here.
All right, let's look at Section 4, Orchestrating the AI Hive.
So how does this mesh network actually coordinate today's cutting-edge AI models to enforce all those rules? Let's walk through a quick hypothetical. Imagine a really complex global news event is breaking fast. The Lattice distributes the workload dynamically across the hive. Gemini acts as the eyes, pulling in multimodal vision and search adjacency to analyze the raw incoming images. Grok is over there drinking from the real-time social sentiment fire hose to see how the crowd is reacting. Meanwhile, Claude steps in to handle the long-horizon synthesis, ensuring the safety envelopes are intact and figuring out the broader historical context. Perplexity is rigidly grounding all the evidence, fact-checking every claim in real time. And finally, ChatGPT handles the formatting and code generation to actually present the findings clearly. Every single factual claim must be tied to a concrete evidence object, so no single model ever acts totally autonomously without the rest of the hive checking its work.
This continuous operational lifecycle functions pretty much exactly like a digital heartbeat. First, it pulses, looking for anomalies or sudden spikes in information. Second, it triggers activation, which binds all those relevant AI nodes together to tackle the problem. Third, it runs a really strict evaluation based on that triad of governance we discussed. Does this actually increase coherence? Is the attention cost survivable for the user? Can the action be reversed? And if it fails any of those checks, it immediately moves to the fourth step, decay. I really want to emphasize this decay phase. In an era where the internet literally never forgets anything, it is absolutely fascinating that this system is explicitly designed to aggressively forget useless noise. It intentionally prunes its own memory to save on computing costs and keep the whole ecosystem lightweight and sane.
Finally, Section 5, Prototypes for Tomorrow.
Let's look at what this blueprint might actually look like in the real world over the next decade. Imagine automated civic infrastructure acting as cognitive firebreak networks. These networks would detect when a panic narrative is spreading way too fast for human cognition to process, and then automatically insert a mandatory cooling period. Contrast that with how our current platforms operate. Today, algorithms actively amplify panic and outrage, simply because it drives engagement and ad revenue. This Lattice prototype does the exact opposite. By tracking velocity spikes in how information propagates, the network slows down algorithmic amplification, intentionally injecting context and friction before a full-blown panic spiral can take hold of a population. Or picture turning on the morning news and seeing attention storm warnings and narrative turbulence alerts forecasted just like an incoming hurricane. Since we actually already have the tools to track online sentiment and informational volatility, it's entirely feasible to treat public cognition as a collective atmospheric system. We could issue legitimate forecasts to help people and institutions brace for massive drops in societal coherence. I mean, think about it. How would you change your day or the way you interact online if you woke up to a Category 4 narrative hurricane warning right on your phone?
We might even see the development of things called identity elasticity registries. Now, these would be digital and social scaffolds explicitly designed to help people transition across different fluid belief systems. I know that sounds a bit abstract, but let's make it concrete. Think about the intense polarization and social friction we see today when someone changes their political stances, leaves a religion, or heavily shifts their worldview. It causes immense identity shock, right? Well, future cognitive institutions built on the Lattice could treat identity as a dynamic, evolving variable, providing the necessary grounding and grace to maintain social coherence during times of extreme personal or collective change.
Ultimately, intelligence itself is an emergent phenomenon. We are rapidly moving from a world where we govern compliance to a world where we must govern attention flows and perception frameworks. The older bureaucratic systems we've relied on for centuries won't necessarily be destroyed by force or revolution. Instead, they will simply be cognitively bypassed. The world will just route around them, kind of like water flowing around an obstacle in a stream, simply because the fundamental environment they rely on has shifted completely underneath their feet.
So the older systems are fading fast as the noise continues to rise, and it leaves us with a critical question. You have to ask yourself, will your institution adapt to become a dynamic, cognitive architecture, or will it simply fade into irrelevance? The blueprint for the Lattice Global Mesh Network is already being drafted, and it is poised to completely change how human coordination actually functions. The only question left is, where exactly will you fit inside it? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it shifted your perspective on the invisible architecture running our world today.